Hello everyone and welcome to another video of Barrel and Glass. I'm Tressa and I'm here to talk about your alcohol. Today we have with us a Swedish vodka. So this is pretty well-known vodka, which is the Absolut Vodka. So let's get started. First, let's understand its history. So the story of the Absolut Vodka traces back to the 1879 when a Swedish entrepreneur L.O. Smith introduced Absolut Pure Vodka. So Smith went about with a new method of continuous distillation, refining vodka to a purity that surpassed traditional pot still methods. So the brand as we know it came about in 1979. That's exactly 100 years later. That's when the brand as we know it, the modern Absolut Vodka, came into the picture when it was launched by the Swedish state-owned company Vin and Spirit in New York to target the US market. And finally in 2008, French group Pernod Ricard acquired Vin and Spirit from the Swedish government, and today the Absolut Vodka is exported to over 120 countries. Let's deep dive into how this is made and what it contains. So let's talk about the ingredients required to make this. So it has two major ingredients, which is the winter wheat and water. In the classic Absolut Vodka, there are no added sugar. So Absolut Vodka is known for a one source philosophy. That means every single ingredient is sourced from one single place. It's Åhus in Sweden. Winter wheat is sourced from around 338 farms in southern Sweden. So this winter wheat is like hardy grain that grows through the Swedish winter, which gives vodka its soft mouthfeel. And the second ingredient, which is water, is again sourced from deep well, which is later on filtered ancient Swedish limestone, which removes all the impurities and adds mineral balance. So those are the two main ingredients to make the classic Absolut Vodka. So now let's deep dive into the production process. So the very first step, of course, is sourcing the ingredients. As I mentioned earlier, the two ingredients, which is the winter wheat and water. Both of them sourced from the same place as they follow the one source philosophy. So now we move on to the second step of the production process, which is the milling, cooking and conversion. So let's understand this a little better. As soon as the winter wheat is arrived in the distillery, it is milled into fine flour using large roller mills, and then it is moved for mashing. So the flour is mixed with hot water, creating like a thick porridge like consistency. This particular section has, like you could say, two parts. The first is called as the liquefaction. In the liquefaction stage, the mash is heated to around 85 to 90 degrees Celsius to reduce the mash's viscosity, to turning it from the porridge like stage to more of like a sweet liquid slurry. So if you're being very technical about this, an enzyme is added called as alpha amylase. So what this basically does, it breaks the long tangled starch molecules into shorter chains. So this kind of changes its consistency from that porridge like stage to more like a liquidy, sweet slurry kind of a liquid. And the second part of this called as the saccharification. So here the mash that we've got now, which is turned into kind of like a sweet liquidy slurry, is cooled down to around 60 degrees Celsius. And again, enzymes are added, like called as the, if you're being again technical about this, called as the glucoamylase, which will create a much richer solution. So once it is in the, it's done and it is in the perfect stage, they move on to the next step, which is fermentation. This basically means through all these enzymes that we have converted the winter wheat into kind of like sugar e-liquid substance that is converted to alcohol with the fermentation process. So let's understand this step. The sugary mash is cooled and transferred to large fermentation tanks. Mostly it will be like stainless steel tanks. These will be like vessels that has like kind of like cooling jackets, and then the yeast is added. During fermentation, which would be around 48 hours, the yeast kind of like consumes the glucose and produced ethanol and carbon dioxide. Heat is released, so it is very important that the vessels maintains the temperature using the cooling jackets that I mentioned earlier to around 30 to 32 degrees Celsius. And they also ensure that the carbon dioxide or the CO2 that is produced is vented away, and that's the fermentation step. So here the mash is converted from sugars to alcohol. Now we move on to the next step, which is distillation. So now here comes, this is the step that actually makes the Absolut Vodka very unique. It goes through a process called as the continuous distillation. So this method pioneered by the founder itself, L.O. Smith. So unlike traditional distillation, usually they follow batch distillation, which means that a still is filled, it is distilled, empty, and then refilled. So that is like batch distillation. Absolut Vodka actually follows a process called as continuous distillation. This means the process is kept running non-stop. It keeps feeding the fermented wash from one end and collecting the pure spirit on the other end. So how does this work? The mash enters a tall column which is heated from below, and the alcohol along with other components evaporates upwards and the water remains in the bottom. And these vapors enters into columns which continuously condensed and again is re-evaporated on a series like that. So each time this process where it evaporates, cools down, evaporates and cools down, each time this process happens, lighter components like ethanol rises up and heavier components like fuel oils falls. And then in the end, like I have mentioned many other times, where the head and tail will be removed. In the end, where in the final product there will be like the head and tail where undesirable components are there will be removed and only the main part is taken. So through this continuous step, almost every impurity is removed while also kind of maintaining the grain's natural aroma. So the result of this is a spirit with a 96% ABV. This is an extremely pure ethanol which also kind of retains the subtle grain character. So this process is what sets Absolut Vodka apart, which makes it unique. And then we move on to the next step. So in particular with the production of Absolut Vodka, how they handle the byproducts. So the non-alcoholic remains like whatever the spent grain and yeast residues, which is called as the stillage, which is usually very rich in fiber and protein. So rather than waste it, Absolut partners with local farmers who use it as high protein animal feed, which kind of like closes the entire loop. That is a step that they do with the byproducts that come from this strenuous process. So now coming to the next step of making the vodka is the blending process. So the pure spirit cannot go into the bottle yet at 96 ABV. So it is diluted with drinking water and the strength is brought down to around 40% ABV. So this dilution process also uses the same limestone filtered water that I had mentioned earlier. This is so important because the water quality affects two major things, that is the mouthfeel and the clarity and stability of the vodka. By mouthfeel I mean like if the water is hard water, you kind of get like a harsh mouthfeel, but if the water is soft water, you kind of get a very smooth feel, a smooth mouth feel. Another step that usually is followed when you make vodka is kind of like a charcoal filtration, but in the case of Absolut Vodka, they do not follow charcoal filtration because already there is a continuous distillation that happened in the earlier stage. That's another unique process that Absolut Vodka follows. It is famously known for its not doing charcoal filtration process. So after it is brought down to the required percent, that is 40% ABV, it moves on to the next step, which is bottling. The bottling process is also again done in the same place, which is because they want to keep to their one source promise. The bottles are usually made from 40% recycled glass, and the bottle is designed keeping in mind old apothecary bottles design, which is clear, mineral, and iconic. So the labeling is actually screen printed directly onto the glass rather than paper labels, and we'll take a closer look to everything that's on the bottle as well. This is like the classic Absolut Vodka. It does say Absolut Vodka. As you can see, it is screen printed, and right below it says Swedish vodka. It is written here, the two major ingredient is also mentioned in the label below, where it says it is made out of Swedish water and winter wheat. Right below that is the ABV is mentioned, that is 40% ABV, and then you have the production details, the companies that follows. I've highlighted here as the country of Sweden. If you take a look at the back, it has a small kind of like a granulated picture where it says one source, one community, one small village in the south of Sweden. So the one source promise is shown right on the back over here, and the distillery is mentioned here, the Åhus distillery in Sweden. And then you have your standard warnings and the bottle litter. This is like a 750 ml bottle, and on the very top over here you have a picture of L.O. Smith and the year this was started, which was in 1879. So what we had over here is the original classic flavor, that it's unflavored. So they do have a range of flavored. I do have a few mini versions of them over here. So we do have the vanilla, the absolute vanilla. So in each flavor they do have like a writing of what flavor it is, or what of that particular version. So for the vanilla, the glass is frosted. It gives that kind of like a frosted feel. Also, I have another flavor here which is called as the Absolute Ruby Red. So here it is mentioned that it is the refreshing taste of zesty grapefruit. So another very popular flavor that they do have is the Absolute Raspberry. All the other details remain the same, which is the alcohol percentage, and all of that remains the same, but they do have a range of flavors. And another flavor that I have here is the citron flavor, and also I have the pear flavor. Other than this, they have a lot of other flavors. If I'm not mistaken, they have pear and they have green apple, a lot of flavors. Their flavor range is pretty massive. So this is priced between 40 to 50 dirhams in the UAE, which is around 18 to 20 dollars. So let's get on to the next part, which is the smell test and the taste test. So it does have like a plastic seal. So let me just quickly open the seal over here. So the seal also has the watermark that says Absolute over here. So we have the cap that needs to be unscrewed. Oh, there we go. So over here, this is how the bottle is. So let's give this a good whiff and try to understand its aroma notes. So it does give like a subtle, it gives like a cold smell. Like you could say that comes from like the mineral chalky freshness, so it gives it kind of, I don't know how to describe that exactly, it feels like a cold smell. So I'm assuming it's because of that chalky freshness, that minerally smell that you get, and also gives like a subtle grainy, you could say, like if you had like unsalted bread, and how would that smell? So it kind of gives that grainy smell as well. Some subtle notes of like dried fruit, very light though. So let's move on to the taste test. So the liquid is clear and pours out, the liquid does pour out clear, as you can see over here. And so let's give this a taste test. Yes, so it does give like a round, soft mouthfeel to it. It's not too harsh. It doesn't dry out the mouth very instantly when you like, it's not too harsh. It is pretty soft on the mouthfeel. And talking about the tasting notes, I do taste a hint of light grain, a bit of nuttiness, and definitely the ethanol taste actually hits first. It goes down pretty smooth, not very hot on the throat. It does hit the back of your throat pretty fast. I feel like if you go ahead with the flavored versions of the Absolut, the experience would be much different. So this is the classic flavor. So to distinguish the taste, you need to actually put in a little bit of thought. You need to take multiple small sips to kind of understand the underlying flavor for this. So let's talk about how you can have this and what are the food pairings that goes well with this. When we are talking about food pairings, an absolute amazing pair that you can go with this is to kind of go for salty fried food, you could say. So pickled stuff or seafood would go great with this. Another pairing would be bread, dairy and cheese, mild cheese. They go best with this. Your traditional European dishes would pair really well with this. Seafood and shellfish are the go-to pairing that you can pick for this. And some of the surprising sweet pairings that you can have is dark chocolate or like honey cakes, or even frozen berries go well with this. So I do have like a serving tip. So for a unique or like a more fun experience of having this is to put your Absolut Vodka in the freezer. I know it doesn't freeze, but kind of thickens. And if it is served in that very cold state, it kind of thickens a bit and kind of softens the heat of the and keeps the more subtle. So it's the best experience you can have for having this vodka is to stick it in your freezer for a few hours and then drink. Now coming to the cocktails, some of your timeless classic cocktails that you can make with vodka are your vodka martini, Bloody Mary, your Cosmo, a Moscow Mule, and you can also take a twist on making this into like fresh fruity cocktails like a screwdriver or sea peas. Yeah, so that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed and learned a little bit more about your alcohol today. Let me know in the comments down below if you have tried this vodka, if you have like a preference on the vast flavor varieties, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.